It's funny how you can spend years with someone, build a life together, and still be blindsided by the truth. 8 years. That's how long we were together. 8 years of birthdays, holidays, lazy Sundays on the couch, and late night conversations that seemed to last forever. She was my world, and I thought I was hers. But as it turns out, I was just a small part of a much bigger picture, one I had no idea I was even in. Her name was Emma, and when we first met, I was head over heels. She had this way about her, a mix of confidence and vulnerability that drew me in. I felt like the luckiest guy in the world when she agreed to go out with me. Things moved fast after that. Before I knew it, we were living together, talking about our future, making plans. We were young when we started, in our early 20s, like full of dreams and ambitions. She was finishing her degree, and I was just starting to make my way up the ladder at my job. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Or at least, I thought it was. The first few years were great. We were that couple that did everything together. Weekend getaways, dinner dates, binge-watching TV shows, you name it. We had our share of fights, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. At least, nothing that couldn't be fixed with a bit of time and a heartfelt apology. We were in love, or at least, I was. Looking back, I can see the cracks starting to show around year 6. It wasn't anything big, just little things here and there that didn't seem important at the time. She started staying late at work more often, claiming she had to catch up on paperwork or attend meetings that ran long. I didn't think much of it. I knew she was ambitious, and I was proud of her for working so hard. But maybe I should have paid more attention. We had always talked about getting a place of our own, somewhere we could really call home. For years, we bounced between rentals, never quite finding the right fit. But then around year 7, she became fixated on this one block of flats. It wasn't anything special, just a regular apartment building in a decent part of town. But she was adamant about it, said she had a good feeling about the place. I remember thinking it was a bit odd, how much she wanted to live there, but I didn't question it. I trusted her after all. So we started looking into it. I wasn't thrilled about the rent. It was a bit higher than what we were paying at the time, but she was so excited and I wanted to make her happy. We toured the place together, checked out a few units, and eventually settled on one that seemed perfect. It was cozy, had a nice view, and was close enough to both our jobs that the commute wouldn't be a hassle. I remember the day we signed the lease. She was practically glowing with excitement, and I couldn't help but feel a little proud of us for taking this next step. We were building a life together, one that I thought would last forever. Little did I know, the foundation of that life was already crumbling beneath my feet. Moving in was a blur of boxes, furniture, and exhaustion. We spent our first night in the new place huddled together on the floor, eating takeout and talking about all the things we wanted to do with our new home. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter in our lives. I was happy, truly happy, in a way I hadn't been in a long time. But it didn't take long for things to start feeling off. At first, it was just little things. A shift in her mood, a change in her routine. She seemed more distant, less interested in the things we used to do together. I brushed it off as stress from the move, or maybe work was getting to her. But as the weeks went by, it became harder to ignore. I'd catch her staring off into space, lost in thought or fidgeting with her phone in a way that made me uneasy. She started going out more, saying she needed to blow off steam after work. Again, I didn't think much of it. Everyone needs to unwind sometimes. But there was something different about the way she was acting, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The intimacy between us started to fade too. We went from being inseparable to barely touching, barely talking. I tried to bring it up a few times, but she always had an excuse. She was tired, stressed, not feeling well. I didn't want to push her, so I let it slide, hoping things would go back to normal on their own. But they didn't. In fact, they only got worse. She became more secretive, more withdrawn. There were times when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting in the living room, staring at her phone with a look I couldn't quite read. I'd ask her what was wrong, and she'd just shake her head, tell me to go back to bed. It wasn't until I overheard a conversation she had on the phone one night that everything started to click into place. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I just happened to walk by as she was talking. Her tone was soft, almost intimate, in a way that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't make out all the words, but what I did hear made my heart sink. She was talking to him, her boss, the man she'd been working with for the past year, the man I'd never met but had heard plenty about. He was older, successful, the kind of guy who exuded confidence and authority. I'd never been the jealous type, but something about the way she spoke to him set off alarm bells in my head. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started paying more attention, piecing together the puzzle that had been right in front of me the whole time. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in that specific block of flats, the way she'd pull away from me whenever I tried to get close, it all started to make sense. But even as the truth became clearer, I couldn't bring myself to believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I loved her, and the thought of her betraying me like that was too much to bear. So I kept quiet, hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some other explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. She had been sleeping with him, right under my nose, for the last year of our relationship. All those nights I thought she was working late, she was with him. All those times I tried to hold her to connect with her, she was thinking of him. And the worst part, she had convinced me to move into that block of flats, knowing full well that he lived just downstairs. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion that I had fallen for completely. And by the time I realized what was really going on, it was too late. I was trapped, living in a home that wasn't really mine, with a woman who wasn't really mine either. The day it all came crashing down was like any other. I went to work, came home, and expected another quiet evening with Emma. She was already there when I walked in, sitting on the couch with her laptop open. She barely looked up as I walked through the door, just muttered a quick "hey," and went back to whatever she was doing. It wasn't unusual for her to be distracted these days, so I didn't think much of it. I tossed my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and made my way to the kitchen to grab a drink. As I stood there, sipping my beer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like this low hum of anxiety that had been buzzing in the back of my mind for weeks, and tonight it was louder than ever. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. So I did something I'd never done before. I snooped. I know it's not something I'm proud of, but at that moment, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I needed to know what was going on, and I wasn't getting any answers from Emma. She was always so guarded, so secretive lately, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I waited until she went to take a shower, then made my move. Her laptop was still on the couch, the screen dim but not locked. I hesitated for a moment, my conscience screaming at me to stop, but curiosity and suspicion won out. I tapped the trackpad, bringing the screen back to life, and there it was. A conversation thread with her boss, David. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I scrolled through the messages, each one confirming what I had been dreading. They talked about everything: work, their plans, how much they missed each other. It wasn't just about sex, though. There was an emotional connection there, something deeper than I had anticipated. They were talking like they were in a relationship, a real one, not just some fling. I felt sick. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred as I tried to process what I was seeing. It was all there, laid out in front of me. Undeniable proof that the woman I loved had been lying to me for months, maybe even longer. The more I read, the worse it got. They had been meeting up regularly, sometimes at his place, sometimes at ours when I wasn't home. They even joked about how clueless I was, how easy it had been to keep me in the dark. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying but impossible to look away from. Every word was like a knife to the gut, and by the time I reached the end of the thread, I was numb. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like my world had just been ripped apart. I didn't know what to do, what to say. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to scream and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was still clinging to the remnants of our relationship, couldn't bring itself to do it. So I did nothing. I closed the laptop, put it back where I found it, and tried to act like everything was normal. When she came out of the bathroom, I smiled, asked her how her day was, pretended like I didn't know that she had been lying to me for a year. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I wasn't ready to face the truth just yet. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, trying to keep up the charade, but inside, I was falling apart. Every time she touched me, every time she kissed me, I felt like I was going to break. I couldn't stand to be near her, but I couldn't bring myself to leave either. I was stuck in this horrible limbo, not knowing what to do or where to turn. I started avoiding her as much as possible. I'd leave for work earlier, come home later, find excuses to stay out of the house. When we were together, I barely spoke, afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything would come spilling out. She noticed, of course. She started asking me what was wrong, why I was acting so distant. I'd just shrug, say I was tired, stressed, whatever excuse I could think of to keep her off my back. But it couldn't last forever. I knew that eventually something had to give. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending like everything was fine when it was anything but. I needed to confront her, to get the truth out in the open, no matter how much it hurt. But I was scared. Scared of what she would say, scared of how I would react, scared of what would happen to us. It all came to a head one Friday night. We were supposed to go out to dinner, a date night to reconnect, as she put it. I wasn't in the mood, but I couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to get out of it, so I went along with it. We ended up at this little Italian place we used to love, but the whole time, I could barely eat. I just kept thinking about what I had seen on her laptop, about all the lies, all the betrayal. She was talking, saying something about her day, but I wasn't really listening. I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts, trying to figure out how to bring it up, how to tell her that I knew. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it. The guilt, the fear, the realization that I wasn't buying her act anymore. "Emma," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew. She knew what was coming, and there was no way to stop it. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to play it cool, but her voice was shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I know about you and David," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might deny it, try to lie her way out of it. But she didn't. She just sat there, staring at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked down at her plate, her hands trembling. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. "About a year," she said, her words cutting through me like a knife. A year. An entire year of lies, of betrayal, of her sneaking around behind my back. I felt like I was going to be sick. I pushed my plate away, no longer able to even look at the food. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know," she said, her words choking out between sobs. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." That was it. That was all she had to say. No real explanation, no justification, just a pitiful excuse that did nothing to ease the pain. I couldn't believe it. After everything we had been through, after all the years we had spent together, this was how it ended. With a few mumbled words and a pathetic apology. I couldn't stay there any longer. I pushed my chair back and stood up, throwing some money on the table to cover the bill. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I'm done with you, with this, with everything." She tried to reach out to me, to grab my arm, but I pulled away. I couldn't bear to be near her, not after everything she had done. "Please, Adam, don't leave," she begged, but her words fell on deaf ears. I couldn't stay, not anymore. I needed to get out of there, to get away from her, from the lies, from everything. So I left. I walked out of that restaurant, out of her life, and I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going, what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. It was over. We were over. And as I walked down the street, the reality of it all finally hit me. I was alone. After 8 years, after everything we had been through, I was truly alone. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move on. Walking away from Emma was the hardest thing I've ever done, but in that moment, I knew it was the only choice I had. The betrayal was too deep, too painful to forgive or forget. I wandered the streets for what felt like hours, my mind racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real. How could the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world do something like this? But the evidence was undeniable, and there was no going back. Eventually, I found myself at a small park not far from our apartment, the apartment that no longer felt like home. I sat down on a bench, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all hit me at once, leaving me feeling hollow and lost. I pulled out my phone, not really sure who to call or what to say. I didn't want to dump my problems on anyone, but I also didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. After staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity, I decided to call Jake, my best friend since high school. If there was anyone who could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful as always. "Hey man, what's up?" The moment I heard his voice, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I hadn't cried yet, but hearing a friendly voice, someone who actually cared about me, nearly pushed me over the edge. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake, I need to talk," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the concern in his voice when he responded. "What's going on? You okay?" "No," I said, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. "No, I'm not. It's Emma." "What happened?" he asked, his tone shifting to one of seriousness. "You guys have a fight?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "It's more than that, Jake. She's been cheating on me with her boss for a year." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I wondered if the call had dropped. But then I heard him let out a long, low whistle. "Damn, man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what to do. I walked out, but now I'm just sitting here feeling like an idiot. I didn't see it coming at all." "You're not an idiot," Jake said firmly. "You trusted her. There's nothing wrong with that. She's the one who screwed up, not you." His words were comforting, but they didn't do much to ease the pain. "I just keep thinking about everything we've been through, you know? 8 years, Jake, and it was all just nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he said gently. "It meant something to you, and that's what matters. She's the one who threw it away, not you." I didn't say anything for a while, just sat there letting his words sink in. He was right, of course, but it didn't make the hurt any less. I felt like I had lost everything in the blink of an eye, and I didn't know how to move forward. "Listen," Jake said after a moment, "why don't you come crash at my place for a few days? Get away from there. Clear your head. You don't need to be around all that right now." I hesitated. The thought of going back to the apartment, to all the memories of us together, was unbearable. But at the same time, I didn't want to burden Jake with my problems. "I don't want to be a hassle," I said quietly. "You're not a hassle, man. You're my best friend, and right now you need a place to stay. My couch is open, no questions asked." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I didn't know what I'd do without friends like Jake. "Thanks, Jake," I said, my voice cracking a little. "I'll take you up on that." "Good," he said, and I could almost hear him smiling. "I'll come pick you up. Where are you?" I gave him the address of the park, and he promised to be there in 10 minutes. When I hung up the phone, I felt a little bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was something. At least, I didn't have to face this alone. True to his word, Jake pulled up a few minutes later, his car rolling to a stop in front of the park. He hopped out and walked over to me, pulling me into a quick hug. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me right then. "You okay?" he asked, looking me over with concern. "Not really," I admitted, "but I will be." "That's what I like to hear," he said, clapping me on the back. "Come on, let's get out of here." I nodded and followed him to the car, feeling a little more stable now that I had a plan, however vague it was. Jake didn't push me to talk on the drive back to his place, and I was grateful for the silence. I wasn't ready to dive into all the details just yet. It was all still too raw. When we got to his apartment, he handed me a beer from the fridge and we settled on the couch. He flicked on the TV, something mindless and loud that filled the silence without requiring any real attention. We didn't talk much, just the occasional comment about the show or random joke. It was exactly what I needed, a distraction from the chaos in my head. As the night wore on, the initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I kept replaying the last few months in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see the signs? Jake must have noticed the shift in my mood because he muted the TV and turned to me, his expression serious. "Talk to me, Adam," he said quietly. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I sighed, staring down at the beer bottle in my hands. I keep thinking about all the things I missed, all the times I could have figured it out but didn't. I feel like such an idiot." "You're not an idiot," Jake said firmly. "You loved her, and you trusted her. There's no shame in that. She's the one who should feel like an idiot for throwing away what you had." "But how do I move on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do I get past this?" Jake was silent for a moment, thinking. "One day at a time, man. It's going to hurt for a while, there's no way around that. But eventually, it'll get easier. You just have to keep going, even when it feels impossible." His words were comforting, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I had built my life around Emma, and now that she was gone, I felt like I was drifting, untethered and lost. But Jake was right. One day at a time was all I could do. I wasn't going to figure everything out overnight, but I could start by taking the first step. That night, I crashed on Jake's couch, the weight of the day finally catching up to me. I didn't sleep well. My mind wouldn't shut off, kept replaying everything over and over. But at least I wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Jake was in the kitchen, cooking up breakfast like it was any other day. I appreciated his attempt to make things feel normal, even though nothing about this situation was normal. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder as I shuffled into the kitchen. "Morning," I replied, my voice rough with sleep. "I made breakfast," he said, stating the obvious with a grin. "Figured you could use something to start the day off right." "Thanks, man," I said, feeling a pang of gratitude. "You didn't have to do all this." "Of course I did," he said, sliding a plate of bacon and eggs across the counter to me. "You're my best friend, and you're going through some serious shit right now. The least I can do is make sure you're fed." I managed a small smile as I picked up the fork and started eating. The food was good, but I could barely taste it. My mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, and I knew it would take a lot more than a decent breakfast to fix what was broken. As we ate, Jake and I talked about everything except what had happened with Emma. He kept the conversation light, and I was grateful for the distraction. But eventually, the subject came up again, and I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. "What are you going to do now?" Jake asked, his tone careful. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't go back to that apartment, not with her there. But I don't have anywhere else to go right now." The days at Jake's place turned into weeks, and I was starting to feel like I might be able to move on from everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid Emma forever. I had been putting off dealing with the apartment, with the rest of our life that was still tangled together. Eventually, something had to give, and that something came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday evening when I got the call. I was sitting on Jake's couch, halfway through a beer, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be a work email or maybe my mom checking in, but it wasn't. It was Emma. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the ignore button. But then curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Adam?" she said, her voice small and shaky. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" I hadn't spoken to her since the night I walked out of the restaurant. Hearing her voice now, after everything, sent a wave of emotions crashing over me. Anger, hurt, a twisted sense of nostalgia. But there was something in her voice that made me hesitate. She sounded desperate. "What do you want, Emma?" I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. "Please, Adam," she said, her voice cracking. "I just need to see you. It's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Maybe it was closure I was looking for, or maybe I just wanted to finally put everything behind me. Either way, I told her I'd meet her at the apartment in an hour. When I hung up the phone, Jake looked at me with a raised eyebrow. You sure that's a good idea? No, I admitted, setting the phone down. But I need to see what she wants. I need to end this for good. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Just be careful, man. You don't owe her anything. I know, I said, grabbing my jacket. I'll be back later. The drive to the apartment was surreal. It felt like I was heading back into a life that wasn't mine anymore, a life that I had left behind but couldn't quite shake. As I pulled up to the building, the weight of everything hit me all over again. This place had been my home, our home, and now it was just a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I took a deep breath and headed inside, the familiar smell of the building bringing back memories I wished I could forget. When I reached the door to our apartment, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. It felt strange, knocking on the door of what had once been my own home, but I didn't have a key anymore. I had left that behind, too. Emma opened the door a moment later, and the sight of her took my breath away. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes red and puffy, her hair a mess. She was wearing one of my old hoodies, the one she used to steal all the time because it was the comfiest thing ever. Seeing her in it now, after everything, made something in my chest tighten. Adam, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. What do you want, Emma? I asked, keeping my voice cold. I didn't have time for games. Please come in, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked into the apartment, and it was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as I had left it, as if no time had passed at all. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart starting to race. Why did you want to meet? I asked, turning to face her. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the couch and sat down, looking up at me with those sad, tired eyes. Adam, I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a second. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. You've got a funny way of showing it. I know, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. But it's the truth, and I need you to believe me because there's something you don't know. What could you possibly say that would change anything? I asked, my patience wearing thin. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Adam, I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I staggered back, the room spinning around me. What? I found out a few weeks ago, she said, her voice barely audible. It's yours, Adam. I swear it's yours. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This was the last thing I expected, the last thing I was prepared to hear. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying, but it felt like my brain had short-circuited. How do you know it's mine? I asked, my voice shaking. Because I haven't been with David in months, she said, her eyes pleading with me to believe her. We ended things before I even knew I was pregnant. I didn't want to tell you because I was scared, because I didn't know how you'd react. But it's true, Adam. I'm having your baby. My mind was racing, a million thoughts and emotions colliding at once. I didn't know what to say, what to do. This changed everything. Or did it? Could I even trust her after everything she had done? Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice hard. You've lied to me about everything else. How do I know you're not lying now? She flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. I understand why you don't trust me, Adam. I know I've lost that right. But this is real. I'll take a test, do whatever it takes to prove it to you. But please, please believe me. I stared at her, my mind spinning. If she was telling the truth, this wasn't just about us anymore. There was a child involved, a life that would be forever connected to mine, to hers. Could I walk away from that? Could I walk away from my own child? Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice quieter, the anger starting to give way to something else, fear, uncertainty. Because I didn't want you to find out from someone else, she said, wiping her tears. I didn't want you to think I was hiding it from you, that I was trying to keep it from you. You deserve to know, Adam. You deserve to be a part of this if you want to be. I felt like I was drowning. like the weight of everything was crushing me. I didn't know what to do, what to say. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave it all behind and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, couldn't do it. I couldn't walk away from her, from our child, without at least trying to figure out what came next. I sank down onto the couch, my head in my hands. I don't know what to do, Emma. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've done, but if what you're saying is true, I can't just walk away. She reached out, her hand gently resting on my arm. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance, Adam. For us, for our baby. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. Could I trust her? Could I really try to make this work for the sake of our child? Or was it too late, too broken to fix? Finally, I looked up at her, my mind made up, at least for now. I need time, Emma. I need time to figure this out, to decide if I can do this. She nodded, her eyes filled with hope and fear. I understand. Take all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out. We can figure this out together. I stood up, needing to get out of that apartment, out of the suffocating tension that hung in the air. I need to go, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't try to stop me, just watched as I headed for the door. Adam, she called after me, her voice soft. Thank you for listening, for giving me a chance. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. I just walked out, the door closing softly behind me. As I stood in the hallway, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The future was uncertain, and I didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear, this was far from over.